If you think about it, the relationship between children and animals is the most adorable things you can experience and witness. The thing is, the relationship and bond between house pets and the owner's children is that there's an assumption that the animals are going to treat these tiny humans like friends and protect them with their lives. But that isn't always the case. Rose and Greg couldn't figure it out themselves at first. Their German Shepherd Max did not let their baby walk by himself. Every time their little baby named Joe wanted to walk, the German Shepherd would put his head on Joe's back. When they went to see a doctor, he made a shocking discovery. He called the police immediately. But what was wrong with Joe? And why did the police get involved? Having the authorities involved in these types of situations is never a good thing. The issue is, authorities are always going to investigate and get to the root cause of a problem. Therefore, if you need them to intervene, it isn't smooth sailing when they arrive. The police can either save you from a terrible situation, or they will reprimand you for doing something terrible. When the doctor called the police, they told him that they would come his way immediately. There was something wrong with this baby that he had to report. The doctor felt guilty about the parents. He knew in the back of his mind that they would not do this to their child. The doctor didn't want to imply anything illegal, but there was something happening that they needed to get to the bottom of. The first thing the authorities or the police would do is ask a series of questions to support the assumptions made. No one can immediately assess the situation and forcefully reprimand someone without significant proof. The police did the exact same thing since they wanted to know more to further understand what was happening and how they can deal with it smoothly. When the police finally arrived, they spoke to the doctor first. After that, they wanted to speak to their parents. They sounded very serious. "You both need to come with us. It is really important." Rose and Greg were shell-shocked. What did they do wrong? The parents were shocked that they were going through the interaction, but it was better that they were honest rather than hide from the truth. The main problem was the doctors had something in mind that the parents had no clue about. Therefore, when the authorities were asking questions and they shared their answers, nothing was matching up. It was as if the doctor was making assumptions and problems that the parents had no clue how to address, and neither did the authorities. Rose and Greg answered all the questions about them and their little baby named Joe that the police asked. But when they were done answering all the questions, they heard some disbelief from the doctor's office. "I can't believe this," said the doctor. But what did the doctor find inside the child that he was so incredibly surprised by? The family in this article and story was your typical family. They were building a bright future for their child, and they were all happily living with each other. The next step in their long-term relationship was to bring life to the world and to give that child the life they deserve. They were responsible parents from the get-go and were ready for what life has to offer. For almost a year now, Rose and Greg are the proud parents of their son, Joe. Both Rose and Greg had the desire to become parents. The thing about pregnancy is that you can never dictate when it will happen and how many tries you have to take before getting pregnant. And after they had been together for a while, they decided to continuously try till they bore a child. But that didn't exactly go as planned. Rose struggled to get pregnant. The first assumption of the couple would be the fact that maybe it wasn't meant to be, or they weren't ready. They had tried for almost 2 years now without success. Rose and Greg started to panic a bit. What if it wasn't meant to be for them? Should they consider other options? Then Rose decided to take matters into her own hands. Having medical intervention or the aid of medical help is one of the ways a couple can get to the bottom of why they weren't getting pregnant. The great thing about medical advancement is the fact that it is easier to trace the problem and it can be resolved with proper medication. Doctors can also advise a different approach as to how to get pregnant, which can significantly help the couple. She went to a doctor. Rose wanted to learn more about what she was going through, thinking that the problem may be with her and that she could easily get the medical attention she needs. Maybe there was something wrong with her body that she did not know about. Rose visited the hospital and the doctor checked everything. After that, she had to go home and wait for the test results. The immediate response of women or men in this situation is to blame themselves because there could be something wrong with their reproductive organs, respectively, which led to such a conundrum. Doctors will always advise you never to blame yourself because the stress could also lead to a challenge and struggle when couples try to get pregnant. Weeks passed by, but the results weren't there yet. These results could make or break the relationship, since sometimes it can be a reason for separation if one party is not capable of making a child. Also, she did not tell her husband Greg about her hospital visit. She started to regret the decision. She knew she had to tell Greg, but would he be mad for not involving him in this? Being completely honest, or at least giving your partner the heads up about your actions, leads to open communication, where you can solve the problem together rather than fight the battle alone. Some couples think that keeping secrets allow them to drift apart. Therefore, Rose knew that it was about time she told her husband about what she did rather than him finding out on his own later. After a lot of hesitation, she had the courage to tell Greg. Beating around the bush was one of the things Rose did, since she wasn't ready, but she needed and wanted to tell him about it. She started to explain that she was worried that there was something wrong with her body. She was about to cry when she told Greg what she did, but she did not expect Greg's reaction. Rather than expecting what could have been the biggest fight of her life, Greg reacted in a manner where he was more understanding of what his partner was going through. He immediately settled her down and they had a healthy conversation about it. He believed that the act his partner did was for the benefit of both of them and that it was the goal they wanted to achieve. Greg was surprised by the courage of Rose to tell him this. He admired her even more than he already did. She faced a challenge and risk alone rather than the option for them to solve it together. Rose obviously was happy with Greg's reaction. It felt like a big relief that he approved her action. It even led to asking her something from Greg that he maybe would not like. Of course, since Rose was willing to check herself, Greg took it as an opportunity to have himself checked too. Again, pregnancies have both parties involved. Truth be told, being checked is not something to be ashamed of. There are people who assume that being checked can mean that they are less of a person. Then again, it is better to admit that you want to have it resolved rather than pretending. She asked if he could see a doctor as well, just to make sure everything was alright with them. The doctors may have the answer they need to ensure that they have maximized all resources. He responded positively and went to the hospital as well. After he finished his medical checks, he had to wait as well. But the call from their doctor came soon after Greg's check. When you get a call from a doctor, the initial response is not to burst with joy, but mixed emotions about whether the call would be good or bad. Luckily, the doctors were about to shed some light on the matter, even if the answers may not be what Greg and Rose expected. Greg was willing to pack a bag and ready to hear what the doctor has to tell him. The doctor asked him to come to the hospital immediately. Greg and Rose were worried. This couldn't be good news, right? They were reluctant to go to the hospital, but they had to. When they arrived at the hospital, they luckily had not had to wait long before the doctor arrived. Doctors can come and go depending on the call needed. His arrival was expected since he initiated the call to begin with. One of the things that can baffle the minds of people is how doctors are able to stay calm despite any type of news they're about to deliver. In Greg's case, the doctor was about to give him the answers to the checkup that would inform them of the marital issues they were facing as they tried to bear a child. The results were going to change the lives of both Greg and Rose for better or worse. We all know that if a doctor calls you to their office, there must be something wrong, right? They sat down and got something to drink. After that, the doctor cut straight to the chase. He told them that they were completely fine and healthy. This was obviously a big relief for both Greg and Rose. But that wasn't all. The doctor had something else. The sigh of relief that Greg and Rose had after the news, they were ready to try it again. Being healthy enough to bear a child is something that you would want to hear from the doctors. So, after several attempts once again, they were eventually going to get the gift that they've been waiting for. Some people would give up and just adopt even if there were possible results, but Greg and Rose believed otherwise. He told them that Rose was actually pregnant. Finally, after waiting for so long, they were about to start the family they have always wanted to have. It was still early stages, but they were both really happy that they finally could tell everyone that they were pregnant. Everyone seemed really happy for Rose and Greg, except for one family member. Their dog, Max, a German Shepherd, seemed not to be very happy with the pregnancy. It kept on licking, sniffing, and barking toward Rose's pregnant belly. Greg and Rose decided to ignore this at first, as they thought this was Max making clear he was also still part of the family. These signs may be either good or bad, since these animals can sense both danger and safety. Luckily, Max seemed to calm down after a few months of his behavior, and after 9 months, their baby boy Joe was born. The couple was so excited to introduce the little baby to their family pet and have them bond like they see in movies. Rose and Greg were over the moon with the little kid and lived on cloud 9 for the first few weeks. But that changed soon. After the first few months, Joe started to crawl, make some noises other than crying, and was about to walk his first steps. But there was someone who didn't fully agree with the progress Joe was making so quickly. Every time Joe wanted to crawl or walk, Max stopped him. He laid his head on the back of Joe so that he couldn't move. At first, Rose and Greg thought that Max just wanted to play with Joe. But when the strange behavior dragged on, it got more and more strange for them. Rose got worried. What if Max would harm their baby in the long run? That still could be the case if he already was so protective or aggressive towards their owners. She got worried and started to Google his behavior, something she regretted as soon as she did it. At first, she found a lot of things that she couldn't relate to. But when she found a forum that exactly described the behavior of Max towards their baby Joe, and the comments weren't exactly good, she found that it could be two things, which both would not be a good sign. Your initial response at times like this would be to handle this with care and maximize resources before jumping into conclusions. The first option was that Max himself could be ill and wanted to let know their bosses by getting their attention. Rose was shocked by this possible diagnosis and immediately went to Greg to tell him this. He knew they only had to do one thing. They immediately went to the vet to check everything was alright with their beloved dog. The vet started to do some checks, and after an hour of waiting, they got the answer from the vet. Max was healthy. This was a big relief for Rose and Greg, but at the same time, it scared them really much, as Rose and Greg knew what the forum said about the other possibility. It scared Rose so much that she had to cry right away. The health of both the baby and the dog were what clouded the judgment and mind of the happy couple, since they wanted everything to be okay. She yelled at the hospital employees that she wanted to see her doctor right away. Luckily, the hospital employees knew how to deal with the situation and calmed down both Joe and Rose. After a few minutes of waiting, the doctor arrived. The doctor took Rose and Joe with him to his office. First, the doctor asked some questions about the situation. Shortly after, Greg finally arrived after being stuck in traffic. At first, the doctor seemed relaxed about the examination and everything looked fine, but the tone of the vet changed when he made an echo. He obviously found something that wasn't okay. Rose and Greg both observed this tone change, but they did not want to interrupt his examination. The doctor did some other tests and made an echo again, but he didn't speak to Rose and Greg for about 5 minutes. This frustrated them. Why didn't he just tell them what was going on? But as soon as he was done, he said something that shocked both Rose and Greg. "I have to call the police. I'm sorry," said the doctor. The doctor shortly left the room to call the police. Rose and Greg were left behind in the office for a short night. The police told the doctor that they would come right away. As soon as the police arrived, they started to ask some questions. First, the doctor had to answer some questions, but the police soon went to Rose and Greg. At first, it was just normal questions, but after that, the police, its tone changed. They started to ask more personal questions about Joe, Rose, and Greg. Rose and Greg answered every question, but it still didn't make sense to them as to why the police had gotten involved. But that would soon change. The police officer said, "Sir, you have to come with us. We have to ask you some questions." Greg did not understand this. Why did they want to question him? He did not do anything wrong, but since he had nothing to hide, he decided to answer the questions to avoid more misery. Rose got scared. Greg had to go with the police to another room. But why? Greg wasn't a criminal or something. Rose joined Joe, who also started to cry. They had to wait patiently, as the doctor wasn't allowed to say anything until the police got back in the room. It was overwhelming because there was so much happening and they couldn't wrap their head around it. In the other room, the police asked really specified details to Greg. If they got pregnant naturally, whether Joe has had medicines in these past months. All of those questions didn't make sense to Greg. Why should they know that information? After he answered the questions, the police asked Greg to come to them at the police station. Greg was shell-shocked. Why should he come with the police? He refused at first, but the police told him that it was urgent and that he needed to come with them. Greg reluctantly agreed with the police to join them. Meanwhile, Rose was really worried. Why did Greg have to come with the police? Luckily, the doctor was able to calm her down by telling her that it had nothing to do with Greg himself. Greg obviously got angrier and angrier. First, he had to answer all of those strange questions, and now he was in the interrogation room of the police. What was going on? He could not figure it out, but then the police finally explained themselves a bit more. It was frustrating because it was as if nothing was getting resolved and there were no answers shared. All of a sudden, on the other side of the window, there were 5 criminals standing next to each other. Greg had to say whether he recognized someone or not, and to his shock, he saw someone familiar. All Greg could think was how this person ended up in a police cell. It was his pharmacist. But why was he there? As soon as Greg told the police that he recognized his own pharmacist, the police gave him some more context as it was very strange for Greg to be in this situation. The police told Greg that the doctor found an illegal medical chip inside Joe's body. This chip could regulate the medicines needed. However, this wasn't legal yet. Greg's pharmacist apparently put it in their medicines to Joe, which are in Greg's name. Now, everything made sense. But this wasn't the end of it all for Greg, as Rose and Joe were still in the hospital. Was everything going to be fine with this kid? Greg was allowed to leave the police right away after identifying his own pharmacist. The police even drove him back to the hospital. He went to the hospital hoping that everything was all right with both Rose and Joe. But when he arrived at the hospital, he couldn't find them at the doctor's office anymore. He ran back to the reception, asking where his wife and children were. The nurse told him that they were in the surgery room. Greg panicked. Why were they there? What happened? But he soon found the answer he was looking for. He ran to the surgery room where Rose was waiting in front of the surgery room. They hugged each other, and after that, Rose started to explain why Joe had to have surgery. They wanted to remove the medical chip. But Greg wanted to know whether Joe would be all right. Soon after Rose told him that they had to remove the chip, the doctor came out of the surgery room with good news. It was a small procedure that was without any risk. So Joe was healthy. The only thing Rose and Greg had to do was thank another family member. They went back home and thanked their dog, Max, straight away, who already felt something that Greg and Rose otherwise never would have seen. After that, they were a happy family again, and Max let Joe finally walk his first steps. What they thought was a dangerous scene has become a scene that was one for the books, and they surely won't forget it.